So we are going to be having conversation on how Africa and global organizations can harness OSPOs for growth, development, and sustainability. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm pretty sure you've been having an amazing time, and thank you for joining us in this conversation. So, in history, open source technologies have always been the medium in which development and innovation has been derived across. And open source program offices is that department that organizations can be part of this innovation across. But and today we'll be discussing how Africa and global organization can harness open source program offices for growth, sustainability, and development. And beginning from my right, you have Obaoluwa Ajiboye. He's the founder of TechUp, an organ that bridges digital divide for underdeserved children across Africa. He's also well known for his contribution to digital public infrastructure and part of the team that set up UNDP, the first ever open source program office in Tango and Tingalia. And the next person beside him is Precious Onyewuchi. She's an open source manager who supports organizations in adopting open source practices. As a contributor to open source communities and projects, she also supports education and advocacy around open practices. And the next person beside her is Mary Blessing Okoye. She is a community architect, a diversity inclusion and body advocate and program strategist. She has worked on the version 3 of Contributors Covenant, the most popularly and adopted code of conduct in open source. And just beside me is Anita Ehuman. She is a developer relations engineer and open source evangelist, and also she serves as a board member in Chaos and Open UK, known for her contribution to the cloud native community, Abuja, and across other open source communities. And me here, my name is Harmony Elendo. My call is around projects, product, and documentation. I'm the technical lead documentation for Chaos Focus Group. I'm also the technical product manager in Higher Africa, hosting Chaos Cast, and I've been very active in different open source communities, including Chaos To Do Group and a lot other different open source. So as we get started, I would love Mary Blessing to actually describe what open source program office is.
Right. Thank you so much, Harmony, for that. It's a pleasure to be here. So, I know all of us here, we already have an understanding of what open source is and its importance and value in the ecosystem. So, now coming down to OSPOs, what are OSPOs? What do they do? So, OSPOs are companies, organizational units that is tasked with of the responsibility of the use of the contribution to and even the leadership of open source tools and software with in respect to the company's perspective, right? So this body would usually make sure that there is compliance of the softwares that the organization is using or even producing, right? So yeah.
Okay, so why is OSPO existing? Open source program office. Why does it matter?
Right, right. That's a very good one. So it matters. It matters for a lot of reasons, right? And even especially for us here in Africa, right? There's been a lot of talks around us, you know, tilting towards sustainability, reusability, right? And if organizations would really want to or care about these things, I strongly believe that OSPOs don't matter. And first of all, I would like to touch on the point on license compliance. So there are a lot of licenses that open source tools do use, right? And the OSPOs, open source program officers within an organization would make sure that these licenses are compliant to, or rather the license or the tool the organization is using, right, that like they are using it in a way that is compliant to the license that the open source is governed under, right? Or the license is governing, right, in with that open source tools. The another thing would be around open source education, like literally educating both the staff within the organization around how to use these tools, the open source tools that the organization is using, right? Because the developers could have programming knowledge, but do not necessarily have knowledge around specific open source tools, specific components, right? So this, I suppose, the team, they are responsible, right, to make sure that the developers, understand these tools, how to use them, and whatever, like basically like whatever the tool is required or requested of the organization, that these developers are, they have that in mind while they are using the tool. Then another thing would be around another reason would be around sustainability, right? Again, I had mentioned that if organizations do care about sustainability, it makes sense that they start using open source tools, open source softwares, right? And these OSPOs are there to make sure that um, um, the the conversations around the policies, right, is being adhered to, right. OSPOs are also there to make sure that the organization, right, like so I I know I'm saying a whole lot now, but pretty much what I'm trying to say is that OSPOs do matter, because if your organization care about sustainability, care about scalability, care about innovation, this team is going to be there to make sure that everything is put in place, structures, processes, right, and laws are adhered to, policies are adhered to make sure that you as an organization are using the tools, the open source tools that you want to use for that, for that innovation, for that for skill in general. Yeah.
I actually love the fact that you highlighted sustainability as one of the core benefits. Yeah. So, but let's bring it down to Africa, Oba. How would you evaluate our journey when it has to do with open source program officers?
Um, so generally, honestly, Africa is still in its early stage in OSPO, right? It's promising, right? We have the conversations are happening. Um, the reason we're seeing the reasons, the zeal is also there, but it's still early, and but it's promising.
Yeah. Do we even have open source program officers that actually exist in our continent?
So it's a yes or no answer actually. Um, I would say no, like publicly, but at the same time, yes, because it's a work in progress. So there's this project that EU funded started funding 2 years ago to set up an OSPO in 2 countries worldwide. It's been implemented by ITU and UNDP. The one for UNDP was they set it up in Trinidad and Tobago, but ITU is setting up their own in Kenya. So that is us bringing it down to our continent. And I'm sure when it's up and running, it's something that we would make reference to, and we can now boldly say, yes, we have an OSPO in Africa.
Yeah, actually, I've seen like reports that there's already been like some positive benefits.
Yeah.
So, like with your experience and your work with your NDP, how would you say those benefits actually, like, why are those benefits already existing?
Um. Okay. Let's look at the reason. Let's just look at a bit of why Kenya is the choice. During their protests, right, I got to realize that there was an open source platform that they end up using that actually helped them with the numbers and also reaching out to everyone to be able to know what was going on in the country then, right? So if we look at this like as something that we could take advantage of, right? Or a benefit of what it's doing to the citizens for them, for their voice to be heard, right? And yeah, I think that would answer that particular question of the benefits.
Thank you so much for highlighting that open source program office has always been like one of the ways that organizations have always given back and to the community, to the people for the continent, right? So, Anita, would you tell us how organizations can actually incorporate open source program offices?
All right, thank you very much for that question. So, I don't know if you are all aware, I'm sure we all do, but one of the problems we tend to have is we do more consumption than more giving out. And in open source, there's like the need to always give out because you're creating things that people are using randomly. And so you're an organization and you have the need to actually look into OSPOs. I think the first thing to actually do is understand why you need it as an organization. So many projects today are talking about OSPOs, 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 but they don't know what exactly it is for or what they want it for. It could be for the compliance and the risk issues. You have a project and you want to like make sure that the licensing issues are done rightly. The OSPO team is one of the reasons why you would need something like that. Are you looking for someone to like simplify processes? So many people today have open source, they have project, but they don't have like the processes in order to get people contributing to that project. So assuming your organization has a component that they want to open source, the OSPO team is one of the things that can help you facilitate that to make it easy for developers and engineers to like access your project. It could be for innovation. Like Mary Blessing said, if you want to scale at the end of the day, open source is often the best way to look at. And I think there's a research study that said so many projects have higher chances of increasing innovation when they open source because developers now can render advice and inputs, suggestions to how to improve the software code base and all of that. And at the end of the day, it could also be to make the experience for your users and all of that a lot better. The OSPOs are the people that can also make this possible. So there's so many reasons why, but by the time you've figured out why, it's also good to like go back to so many persons to be like, oh, since we now know why we need it for, let's set up a team of 100 people. It is not like that. Take it easy. Start with the person in your organization that knows what open source is as like that's the best person to actually go to. So many people that are here are working within organizations and they know what open source is, or you know somebody that is already advocating for open source, that is often your best bet to get started with. Recommend those people to stand in as liaisons or people to stand in by setting up contribution guidelines and all of that. Those are those people that you can actually use as a starter. There's no need to set up a magnificent team of experts and pay so much money. You can start with the people within your network that are already doing this. And once you've reached out to those people, there are also organizations that are championing this. There's Chaos, Open Keychain, the Kenyan organization that so many other organizations out there that are championing OSPOs. Even OSPO now is one of the organizations that exist. Reach out, let these persons within your community stand as liaisons, attend meetings, ask how can our organizations use OSPO, how can our organizations adopt OSPO. And by the time you have all of this, it's time to go back, take the feedback you've gotten from these communities to your project. How can our project now use this to build business benefits at the end of the day? Because while you're bringing us, but remember, we want innovation, but we also want to make money off it at the end of the day. So now you can now ask your team internally with the feedback that we've gotten from these organizations. How can we make money off OSPOs? And then continue your discussions from there. And lastly, I'd like to point that one of the issues we often have here is when we set up projects or like small groups like this, after 2 to 3 years it dies off. So try to put up like timelines, how to like monitor and track the progress of these things. Metrics that you're measuring to make sure that the effort that have been put in place are actually executed as they should be, so that we don't have a situation where after 2 years you're telling people that we once had an OSPO but it is no longer existence. Because the idea is you look out for ways to sustain the idea, like the entire concept of OSPOs within your project. And so like set down metrics and how to like keep track of the progress and also bring in new ideas. And at the end of the day, always ask questions for those that are already leading it. Like I said, Chaos, OSPO now, and so many other communities are championing this. You can always ask questions and get help.
Thank you so much, Anita. As we have heard how we have the people here in Africa, we have the communities, we have the people that would help organization, and even people that want to begin their open source program office journey. right? So, Precious, as an open source manager, what are those first time challenges the organization get to face when they're trying to integrate open source program office?
I think usually we can agree that change is something that people don't particularly adapt well to. So typically when you tell a proprietary company to say, oh, we think you should implement open source practices into the way that you do, or they probably come and say, we think this is a good thing and we want to do it, we want to participate in it. One of the things that you might see is from the leadership uh, area, you may not really get ready executive buy-in, right? So maybe the devs might see like the benefits, but then you want to go and like explain to the CTO or the CEO, and then probably even also the CFO, because typically businesses exist for maximizing profit, right? And so now it's, how can we benefit from this, right? You're telling me that I should make my solution open source so that people from outside will contribute to it. How does this benefit us as an organization? So usually that's one hassle. The next one will be the legal part, right? Like Mary Blessing and Anita rightly pointed out, when you have to deal with open source licenses, they can be sometimes tricky because one might say, oh, we're using like a copy left, right? And then if you don't particularly understand what it means, if you implement a copy left into your solution or you adapt a copy left and then tomorrow you build on it and it becomes commercial, that's a whole legal battle that you don't want to get into. So that can actually be very restrictive for the legal team. And then the next one will be processes, because now they've adapted open source. How do we now leave it as a company? That whole thing can be like an issue, right? So I would say that if you or your company like experience things like this, one of the things that OSPOs should typically do would be to educate properly, right? Like proper communication, proper education. You can let the team know why it's important for them to have these processes now, and then also let them know what the benefits are, right? Because if you spell things out, it's easier for people to see why, like the pros and cons, and you can easily weigh them. And then for actually processes is also the same thing. If you educate properly, you let people know like what license is more adequate, or if they want to adapt a solution, what license it has, and if this is something that fits what they currently need. So not all organize. I think that people should at least implement open source in one form or another. If you cannot fully go open source, you can try like the other one, which is like inner source, where some parts might be, yeah. But you also need to like consult with a professional. Um, but in the case where you may not be able to fully go into it, like adapt open source fully, try the one that fits with your organizational needs at the time. And if it's not something that you can do right now at all, you can implement it bit by bit. It can be maybe having somebody that speaks regularly about what you are currently doing. That's like a form of open source, because you're sharing things about what you're doing and it's out there in the open. And I think as a continent, we need to, like Anita said, moving from consumption to creation is really important, right? Because we can't we need to like match up. When you compare like the global north and global south, there's like a huge gap. But yeah, like open source helps us out even in research. It aids for reproducibility, because when things are out there, people can know what solutions exist, what are possible, and they can build on them. And like it's easier to fail fast because you know what's there and other people can work with you. So yeah, it's a good practice for us to have, right? And there are different ways for you to implement them. So just speak to like an open source person around you.
Yeah, I actually like the fact you everybody has been highlighting about education, which is why panels like this exist. We are not just speaking, but also educating people, because people in this room are part of organizations, they're also part of communities. I want Oba to tell us how UNDP has been integrating open source, how the journey have they have been integrating it directly in the African continent.
Um, well, I might not be able to speak to what UNDP is doing directly. Uh, I because I left my engagement with them last year. However, I would talk about the how we can localize the OSPO and not just do the normal thing that most we all tend to do, which is copy and paste, right? So earlier I was having a conversation with Oga Nidi, even if he would never admit that I call him Oga. But yeah, And he was talking to me about this particular project he's working on, which I honestly am excited about. Right. So imagine what we have. We have this what's the name? This Y Combinator, right? So now imagine Y Combinator, but filled with resources from African founders, right? So imagine you have the people like Jason to talk about to teach you how we started Iroko TV. You have Shola to tell you how he was able to scale Paystack, right? Now these are resources that are from it's from someone that you could relate to, not a founder from Silicon Valley that will tell you, oh yeah, so I applied for something funds from the government where you want to see them in Nigeria or Africa, right? So imagine something like that is localized. So us localizing that, not just in something like that, but generally in innovation generally. That's one. Then two is capacity building. Most people don't know about open source, not to talk about open source program office, right? And I will keep stressing on it. Capacity building let's start with Nigeria first. It's a need starting from the grassroots. I did a survey like 3 weeks ago, and imagine a child in SS2, 15 years old, who we listed a couple of tech careers, and it was like she ticked, I've never heard of anything like this before. I don't know what this is. Like, do you get what I'm trying to say? So capacity building and localization of our content. So yeah.
I like the fact that Oba mentioned about localization. One of the problems we have in our continent has to do with infrastructure and development. And while our governments might actually be shying away from it, open source program offices are actually a medium where they can actually create department across parastatals and get involved both with the private sector, the community, because open source is built by the community, by contributors like you and I that are facing problems daily. So open source program offices is actually one of the channels that we can actually fast track development across our regions without even getting to see our faces, because conferences are one of the privileges we get to see our faces, but we have been doing things together, right? I'll ask my panelists if they want to add one or two things before we take questions from the audience.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to buttress a bit about the inner source that Precious had spoke about before. Like as she said, like as an organization, you pretty much would be scared to want to open source your software or what have you, right? And like she said, inner source is one of the way to do that, right? So if you're curious about what it is, it's just pretty much open source practices, but internally, right? So the way you have open source and it's external, right, in the public, but inner source is within the organization. Yeah. So inner source is like within the organization, and it doesn't have to be anything very exorbitant, elaborate. It could be like inner source practice could look like simply encouraging open collaboration and participation, right? The open source philosophy um, of building building early and often, right? Then it could also be something around um, just pretty much making sure that everybody has access to tools and project within the organization and people can contribute to it, and not necessarily because they are not the original initiator of that idea or that project, they can't be a part of it, right? Just those little things, those basic things, just being practicing openness literally, right, can be a good way to start before you can start coming to the public and go open source fully, if that makes sense.
Yeah, before we take one more from the panelists, if you have any question, you could just raise your hands. We actually take questions here, right? It's a conversation, right? Any more?
So, Precious talked about processes earlier, and I know so many persons are wondering, oh, I need to go through some educational pathway or whatnot. Open source starts as simple as like making sure that there are good contributor guidelines for your project. They're good. They're also the license is made available to indicate that your project is open source. something as minor as just making your document for the project that you're trying to like make available, like open to your developers, like the inner source and all of that. Something as minor as that actually screams open source enough. So like looking at the licenses, trying to make sure that your engineers, the developers, making the experience for them to assess your project, contribute to it, see what is going on in your project. All of those are the minor processes that you can start with. It doesn't have to be major. Like I said, you don't need a team of 100 people to start an OSPO. One person that is starting as a community liaison can make the process a lot easier for you.
Thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us in this section. You can actually start your journey even as a contributor across different open source communities. There are actually working groups that focus on open source program offices, metrics, documentation, resource development, and a lot more. And you get to work with people from across the globe, people that their organizations have already started implementing some of those strategies, some of those code of conduct, some of those licenses, and you learn more about it. Thank you so much for joining us today.